You're sitting. Of course you are. That's what people do. That's what we've been trained to do. From school, to work, to dinner, to death. Sit down, stay put, behave. It starts young. Sit still, stop fidgeting, sit properly, cross your legs, don't slouch. A lifetime of being told how to sit. But nobody ever asked if the chair was the problem. You're probably in one right now. Maybe it's soft, maybe it squeaks, maybe it wobbles just enough to keep you slightly anxious. Maybe it's none of those things, but still, it's not comfortable, not really, not for long. And yet, we keep sitting. You didn't come here to hear a bedtime story, not exactly. You came here to fall asleep. And if that happens halfway through a paragraph about chair legs from the 12th century, that's okay. That's kind of the point. So let me guide you into this story slowly. We won't rush. There's no need. You don't need to learn anything. There won't be a quiz. There's no moral at the end. Just facts. Useless ones. The best kind. So breathe in and exhale. Roll your neck just a little. Unclench your jaw. Let your shoulders drop. Let gravity do the work. You've been upright all day. Now you get to lean back and drift. But not too far. That chair has its limits. This is the story of a shape. A tool, a trap, a throne, a square made of lines, designed by people who didn't know your spine existed. The chair. So familiar, so ordinary, so silently hostile. We think of chairs as modern, but they're not. They've been around longer than most things we care about. Chairs were in temples before there were forks. Chairs were symbols of power before democracy existed. And still, they've barely improved. You'd think after 2,000 years we would have gotten it right. But no. We still sit like medieval scribes with scoliosis. We still buy the wrong chair for the wrong reason, in the wrong posture, and we still blame ourselves when we ache. But it's not your fault. It never was. The chair has always been lying. So tonight, let me tell you the slow, stiff, surprisingly depressing story of how humans tried again and again to get comfortable and failed spectacularly. We'll visit the floors of ancient huts, the marble seats of forgotten kings, the wobbly benches of medieval kitchens, the creaking boards of colonial porches, and the mesh-backed, lumbar-shaming horrors of open-plan offices. This is not a thrilling story. It is not romantic. No one gets rescued. No one flies. It is, in every possible sense, boring. Which is exactly what you need. There will be no plot twists, no surprise characters, no battle scenes, just chairs, wooden ones, stone ones, plastic ones, ones with padding that isn't padding, ones with legs that never stop squeaking, ones that look great in the catalog but feel like a punishment after 11 minutes. There will be names you don't remember, cultures you don't care about, dates that mean nothing, and that's okay. Because we're not here to retain, we're here to forget. Forget the pressure in your shoulders, forget the emails, forget the headlines, forget the person who told you that your posture was your fault. It's not. Blame the chair. Always blame the chair. Even now, your body's making adjustments. You've leaned slightly, shifted your hips, maybe stretched one leg out a bit. The chair didn't change. You did. Because you're still trying to make peace with a design that was never made for comfort, only control. It told you to sit, so you did. But it never told you how long, or what would happen when you did it too much, or why your knees hurt when you stand up again. But I'll tell you, slowly, softly, one boring fact at a time. So, let's start this long, winding, unimportant journey. A story with no urgency, no climax. Just chairs, and the people who sat in them, and regretted it. You are not alone. Not really. Because right now, in this exact moment, someone else, somewhere else, is sitting in a chair, just like you, and wondering why their back hurts for no reason. There is a reason, and we're going to uncover it slowly, and maybe fall asleep before we get there. You think of chairs as a given, as normal, as obvious, but they're not. For most of human history, sitting meant one thing: the ground. Not cushions, not stools, not ergonomic mesh or swivel bases, just earth, dirt, stone, maybe a rug if you were lucky, and if you weren't, well, your legs were the cushion. Imagine waking up each morning and dropping to the floor. That's where you'd eat, that's where you'd work, that's where you'd talk to your family, and sometimes that's where you'd sleep. There were no backrests, no padding, just you, your spine, and whatever was beneath you. But it wasn't strange, because nobody knew any different. No one was longing for lumbar support. There were no physical therapists, no sciatica, no seat cushions promising miracles on late-night television. Sitting was a position, not a privilege. The floor was democratic. Everyone had access to it: kings, peasants, children, elders. Everyone sat the same way, on the same surface, in the same pain, or lack thereof. Of course, posture mattered, not because anyone said so, but because your body told you. If you slouched too long, you paid for it. If you sat cross-legged for hours, your knees whispered their complaints. And if you leaned to one side, well, eventually you'd tilt that way forever. But still, the ground didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. It didn't lure you in with a soft cushion only to betray you minutes later. It didn't tilt or creak or slowly sink in strange places. It was solid, it was honest. Unforgiving, yes, but at least it was consistent. And then, something changed. Someone, somewhere, decided they didn't want to sit like everyone else. Maybe it was about status, maybe it was about ego, or maybe their knees just really hurt. Whatever the reason, a person raised themselves. They found a rock, or a log, or they built something from wood, and they sat on it. And everyone else looked at them, from the ground, and they thought, that must be nice. It wasn't comfort, it was elevation, visibility, authority. When you sit above others, people look at you differently. They listen, they nod, they follow. And just like that, the first chair was born. Not as furniture, but as a throne. Early chairs weren't for resting. They were for ruling. They were carved, decorated, made heavy on purpose, and no one could move them. Not just physically, but socially. That chair belonged to one person, and everyone else? The floor. Chairs were statements. They didn't whisper, they shouted. I am above you, literally. Sometimes inches, sometimes feet, but always above. If you entered a room and saw a chair in the center, you knew exactly who it was for. It wasn't you. It was never you. You sat on the floor, or on a rock if you were lucky. The chair was reserved, sacred, untouchable. Unless, of course, you were the one in charge. And over time, as societies grew, so did chairs. They got fancier, taller, more decorative. Not more comfortable, just more intimidating. They became symbols in temples and courts and castles. In ancient Egypt, chairs were reserved for royalty and the gods, carved from ivory, inlaid with gold, built to impress, not to ease. No one cared about the angle of the seat. They cared about the weight of the power it represented. In Mesopotamia, chairs began appearing in religious settings. Priests and rulers sat high while everyone else knelt, bowed, or stood in silence. The chair wasn't just furniture, it was a boundary. Even in early China and India, where sitting on mats was common, chairs emerged slowly, attached to wealth and status, imported ideas, cultural divides. The higher you sat, the less human you appeared. The chair became a barrier between the powerful and the powerless, between rest and ritual, between them and you. And yet, the floor remained. For the vast majority, it was still the only option. Simple, flat, honest, cold, yes, but free. People learned to live with it. Whole customs were built around it. Tea ceremonies, meals, prayers, storytelling. The ground became part of the culture. It was more than just a surface, it was a tradition. But that wasn't enough for everyone. Some wanted more. More wood, more height, more distance between themselves and the dust. And so slowly, chairs trickled into the lives of the upper class. Still not for comfort, just control, just image. A chair was something you were granted, not something you bought. It was a reward, a symbol, an inheritance, and it made sure everyone else stayed down. Eventually, some people started using stools, low benches, platforms, anything to get a few inches higher, not to be better, but to feel it, even if only temporarily. And the floor started to feel lower, not physically, psychologically. To sit on the ground began to mean something different, something less. And so began the shift, from equal posture to seated hierarchy. You weren't just sitting anymore, you were being placed, and that feeling hasn't left us. Even today, when you walk into a room and someone's already in the only chair, there's a power there. Silent, subtle, but real. You feel it, you remember it, even if you don't know why, because deep down, something in you knows that sitting has never been neutral. It's always meant something. And it started, long ago, on the ground. We begin where history likes to begin, with stone, with sand, with sun, with power, with Egypt, ancient Egypt, where the Nile flowed, the pyramids rose, and people learned to sit, poorly. The chair in Egypt was not a household item. It was sacred. It was rare. It was not something you just had. It was something you earned, or were born into, or prayed near. If you were lucky enough to see one, it was probably made of wood. Not just any wood, imported, shaped, polished, decorated with ivory, inlaid with gold. It was not a place to rest. It was a place to display. It creaked with importance. It groaned with authority. No cushions, no tilt, no comfort, just power. The pharaoh had a throne, but even that word is misleading. It wasn't plush. It wasn't majestic in the soft sense. It was elevated, cold, heavy. It said one thing: sit here and you rule. Sit anywhere else and you are ruled. No one asked how it felt to sit in. That wasn't the point. Meanwhile, everyone else sat on the ground, the sand, the steps, the earth. The chair wasn't for them. It wasn't designed for humans. It was designed for gods, disguised as humans. Or at least that's what they said. And then we move west, to Greece, the birthplace of philosophy, of logic, of drama, of democracy, but not of comfortable seating. In ancient Greece, most people didn't have chairs. They had stools, three-legged, unstable, wobbly, like their politics. If you had a proper chair, you were someone, a citizen, a judge, a man with property. But even then, the chairs weren't generous. They had backs, sometimes, arms, rarely, cushions never. They were made of wood or stone. They lasted, not because they were well loved, but because no one dared sit in them for long. The Greeks were thinkers, but they did their thinking on benches, on steps, on the floor of the agora. The chair remained a symbol, not a tool. The klizmos was their most famous design, a curved back, elegance carved into hardwood, often copied, rarely improved. It looked better than it felt, like most things in history. Socrates never wrote a single word, but if he did, he wouldn't have done it from a chair. He would have stood, or leaned, or sat on the ground, because wisdom had no back support. And then Rome, empire, expansion, excess, roads, concrete, blood, wine, and chairs. The Romans inherited the Greek designs, and in true Roman fashion, they made them more elaborate, more decorated, and somehow even less practical. Chairs in Rome were theatrical. Marble, metal, bronze, thrones that could crush toes, seats that could cut you if you sat wrong. The curule chair was a classic, a folding seat used by magistrates, meant to travel, meant to be shown off. It folded, yes, but not for convenience, for symbolism, authority on the move. The sella carulis was not for comfort, it was for dominance. A chair that folded yet sat rigid, like the law it represented. Then there were the dining chairs, or rather, the couches. Romans didn't sit to eat. They reclined, on their sides, propped on one elbow, the other hand free for grapes, bread, or something more decadent. But not everyone got to recline. No, only the important ones. Guests of honor, hosts, men, women, children, servants. They stood, or knelt, or fetched more wine. Even leisure had hierarchy. The triclinia, 3 couches around a central table, were the epicenter of Roman indulgence, designed for show, for power, for display, not for posture, not for health, certainly not for long-term alignment. And still, most Romans, regular Romans, never saw a chair up close. They had stools, or crates, or steps. They sat where they could. And when they couldn't, they leaned. Sitting, back then, was not a right. It was a negotiation. And when things got uncomfortable, you stood, you endured, because that's what civilization asked of you, endurance. And so the chair, in these grand old worlds of marble and mythology, remained exclusive, a thing seen, not shared, a seat granted, not chosen, a frame of power. And through it all, no one questioned the pain, or the strain, or the way a chair shaped the body, not to support it, but to remind it, you are here to serve. Comfort was not a concern. Utility was secondary. Symbolism was everything. And so the chair became myth. It sat in paintings, in statues, in courts. It became the seat of judgment, the seat of reason, the seat of the gods, but never the seat of the people. And as centuries passed, the designs evolved, but the intent did not. The chair was not for relief. It was for rank. And so, long before ergonomic foam, before office swivel bases, before recliners with 12 positions and cup holders, there was this: a block, a slab, a shaped material, cold, hard, elevated, and you beneath it, looking up, waiting. Maybe one day you'd sit, but never like a human, always like a subject, always with stiffness, always with caution, always with the quiet understanding that the chair was never made for you. Not truly. Not yet. The Middle Ages, a time of castles, of cathedrals, of cold, of silence, of long winters and longer sermons, and yes, of very bad chairs. But most people didn't even have those. For the majority, the idea of a personal chair, a seat just for you, was as ridiculous as having your own sword, your own cow, or your own book. You had the ground, you had the bench, you had the log out back that nobody had moved since last harvest. Maybe, just maybe, you had a stool, 3 legs, unstable, angry. The kind of stool that punished you for shifting your weight, the kind that reminded you, stillness is safety. Most homes didn't have dining chairs, because most meals didn't happen at tables. You sat by the fire, on the floor, with a bowl. And if the smoke got in your eyes, you blinked. That was life. In the manor houses, there were benches, long ones, heavy, shared, squeaky. And like everything else in the feudal system, the bench came with rules. You didn't just sit wherever you wanted. There was an order: the lord, his family, then guests, then servants, then everyone else. The closer to the head of the table, the higher your chances of surviving winter. And the bench, though long, never felt long enough. No backs, no padding, no space. You didn't lean, you didn't sprawl, you didn't adjust. You folded yourself, contained, upright, like a prayer, or a prisoner. And then there were the thrones. Ah yes, thrones. You picture majesty, velvet, gold, high backs, glorious discomfort. Because the truth is, Thrones were awful. They were platforms of dominance. Tall, wide, decorated, intimidating, but soft? Never. Thrones were made to be seen from across the hall, not to be enjoyed. They were stiff, wooden, stone sometimes. Sitting in one wasn't a luxury. It was a responsibility, and sometimes a punishment. The more power you had, the more likely your chair was trying to hurt you. There were also chairs of penitence, literally built to shame, made of stone or iron with spikes, with carvings, with names. You sat there when you were wrong or when others said you were, and the chair didn't forgive, it remembered. In monasteries, monks used narrow wooden benches during hours of chanting. No backrests, no cushions, no mercy. You sat for hours, still, silent, thinking of heaven while feeling your tailbone disconnect from reality. In churches, the rich sometimes had private seats, called misericords, little ledges that let you lean while appearing to stand, half sitting, half lying, fully uncomfortable. A medieval solution to a medieval problem. Faith hurts. And then there were the stools used by scribes, hunched over scrolls, candles flickering, backs curved like question marks. They copied books for hours, days, years. And the only thing supporting them was willpower. The stool didn't care, the work had to be done, and the body paid the price. In towns, shopkeepers perched on ledges, butchers sat on crates, bakers leaned on barrels, furniture was function, but rarely humane. Even in royal courts, chairs weren't given, they were assigned. Take a seat was not an invitation, it was a declaration of status. To be seated meant something. To be left standing meant something else. The chair was language, and most people couldn't speak it. So the average peasant sat on the ground, or a rock or the edge of a cart. Children sat in laps, elders sat wherever their joints allowed, and everyone hurt. But no one complained, because pain was part of the order. You woke up sore, you worked sore, you slept sore. The chair didn't help, it wasn't meant to. And if you had one, you guarded it. It was precious. It was rare. And even then, it wasn't kind. Sometimes in guild halls there were chairs made just for show, carved with symbols, marked with pride, but you didn't sit there. You admired. Like a painting, like a relic, like a thing that belonged to someone better than you. And so, centuries passed, one stiff seat after another, wood on wood, body on edge, stillness enforced, comfort forgotten. This was the age of the bench, of the stool, of the throne, that lied, because it promised importance but delivered pain. And when you stood, finally, your legs numb, your hips tight, you thanked the floor, because at least it didn't pretend. The Renaissance. A rebirth of art, of thought, of humanism, of decoration, and of course, of chairs. But not better chairs, not smarter chairs, not kinder chairs, just fancier ones. The kind of chairs that didn't whisper comfort, they screamed wealth. Scrollwork, gilding, embroidery, Latin inscriptions carved into armrests. Chairs became canvases. Thrones became theaters. Everyone wanted to sit like royalty, but no one thought to ask if royalty had back pain. Because by now, the chair was no longer just a seat, it was an identity. Your chair said who you were, how much you owned, how much you didn't move. The more detailed the chair, the more important the sitter. But the sitter rarely smiled, because these chairs were stiff, they were straight, they were moral. Literally moral. In some churches, chairs were designed to keep you alert, to prevent sin, to make sure your body didn't wander. They had narrow backs, unyielding edges, hard corners. like the sermons themselves. At home, the aristocracy commissioned chairs with lion heads, angels, leaves, gold leaf, silk thread, but all that beauty just meant one thing: don't touch, don't lean, don't wiggle, don't spill anything, don't enjoy. You sat like you were on display, because you were. Portraits from this era tell the truth. Everyone looks uncomfortable. No one's relaxed, not even the kings. You can see it in their eyes, a quiet plea. Please, let me stand now. But they couldn't. They had to sit, to be seen, to prove their station, because standing was for workers, for servants, for people who didn't have chairs. And so the rich sat in art, in pain, with pride. Meanwhile, the poor still had benches, maybe a stool if lucky. Nothing changed for them, except the angle from which they watched others rest. In palaces, chair legs got twisted like vines, backs reached up like cathedral spires, seats sank under embroidery thick enough to crush a small animal. But ergonomics, nowhere to be found. The idea that a chair should fit your body, absurd. Your body had to fit the chair, like a role, like a uniform, like a sentence. And if your back ached, you smiled anyway, because to be seated meant to be seen, and being seen was better than being well. In some homes, chairs became family heirlooms, passed down through generations, more symbolic than useful, squeaky, heavy, splintered, but no one threw them out. They were history. They were memory. They were painful, but valuable, like most traditions. During the Baroque era, everything got louder, including chairs. They swelled, expanded, swirled. More curves, more legs, more ornament, more excuses to impress guests and damage spines. Even children had fancy chairs, high-backed, miniature, adorned, teaching them early, pain equals importance. And yet, among all the beauty, one truth remained. No one was comfortable. Not the noble, not the merchant, not the scholar, not the servant watching from the wall. The chair had evolved into an object of admiration, not affection. It was architecture you had to tolerate with your body. The more beautiful it was, the less it helped you. And no one complained, because pain was part of the performance. You dressed for dinner, you dressed for church, you dressed to sit. And the chair dressed with you, matching the room, matching the carpet, matching the rules, but not your bones, never your bones. Even music chairs, used by composers, lutenists, violinists, were delicate, upright, rigid, because slouching was impolite, even if your spine was screaming, but silence was class. So you sat, poised, trapped in luxury, grateful and sore. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. Not immediately and not for everyone, but slowly, mechanically, relentlessly. It altered the way we sat. Factories replaced fields, offices replaced workshops, and workers found themselves trading the ache of standing all day for the stiffness of sitting still. The chair became less of a symbol and more of a tool, standardized, mass-produced, impersonal. A necessity, not a privilege. You didn't earn a chair, you were assigned one. These weren't thrones, these weren't cushioned havens or carved tokens of dignity. These were metal frames with wooden slats, stools that wobbled, benches that never forgave. Chairs that squeaked with every movement, as if to remind you that motion was still permitted, but only barely. And as the decades passed, the materials changed, but the philosophy didn't. A seat was a station, a checkpoint between labor and rest, but never truly either. In the offices, posture became the enemy. The typewriter demanded precision, shoulders square, wrists aligned, back straight. But the chairs? They weren't made to help. They were made to last. You sat because you had to, because your job required stillness. And even the first adjustable chairs, those early experiments in ergonomics, were still brutally stiff. The idea wasn't to comfort you, it was to extract more work. Comfort was a marketing term. Endurance was the goal. There were no lumbar pillows, no foam gels, no curved backs to cradle your spine, only boards, only hard plastic, only punishment. Workers sat in silence, sometimes for hours, typing out reports or invoices while their backs ached and their shoulders hardened into stone. Over time, slouching became survival, a small rebellion, an instinct. And when the day ended, the sitting didn't. You came home to another chair, a dining chair, another straight back, another hard seat. You moved from task to task with barely a shift in position. Dinner, reading, conversation, all while your spine pleaded for movement and your muscles plotted revenge. Living rooms introduced the illusion of softness. The recliner arrived like a hero. Thick cushions, elevated feet, a lever to lean back. But even that, in time, betrayed the body. The cushions collapsed, the back support tilted at the wrong angle, your neck craned forward, your hips sank lower than your knees. It felt good for 10 minutes. Then, it felt like nothing at all. The promise of rest became another trap. Design caught up with ambition in the mid-20th century. Chairs became icons. The Eames lounge chair, the egg chair, the Vasily chair. These weren't just seats, they were statements. Artistic, futuristic, architectural. You didn't just sit in them, you showcased them. They graced magazine covers, modernist homes, corporate lobbies. They told the world, you had taste. But even beauty has limits. Sit in one of those icons for more than an hour, and your body will remind you, this wasn't designed for function. It was designed for admiration. Its angles weren't made for spines. Its materials weren't made for daily use. It looked better than it felt. And that was enough. Meanwhile, advertising spun new fantasies. Chairs for every identity. The executive leather chair. Plush, commanding, dominant. The gaming chair. High-backed, neon-accented, shaped like a racing seat. The meditation stool. Minimal, grounded, ancient-looking. The ergonomic task chair. Scientific, adjustable, medically approved. They sold us dreams of control, that if we just chose the right one, we'd unlock comfort. But behind the mesh, the levers, the headrests, the truth remained. Chairs were still chairs, places to pause, not places to heal, not places to grow, and not places to spend 8, 10, 12 hours of our lives, day after day, year after year. The human body wasn't built for chairs. It was built for motion, for squatting, for walking, for leaning. Sitting for us is temporary, but the world made it permanent, and we adjusted. Not the chairs, we did. We bought cushions, we stretched during breaks, we shifted from side to side. We elevated our feet, we rolled our shoulders. We blamed our posture, we blamed our shoes, we blamed our bodies. But maybe, just maybe, the blame belongs to the object that hasn't changed, the one we keep trusting, again and again to hold us, while it never really does. You might be feeling it now, that familiar stiffness in your lower back, that invisible weight between your shoulder blades, that deep, quiet ache that isn't quite pain, but isn't quite gone either. That's the chair, reminding you who's in charge. And still, we sit. Because we must. Because we don't know what else to do. Because it's normal, expected, cultural, comfortable. Until it isn't. And yet the chair remains. Undefeated, undoubted. The one object we all use, all own, all endure, without ever truly questioning why it makes us feel worse the longer we use it. But we're starting to. Slowly, one ache at a time. At some point, long after we began to build chairs, we started to build rules into them. Not formally, not consciously, but you can see it in the way they're arranged, in the way they're assigned, in the way they watch you when no one else is in the room. The chair, once a piece of comfort, a ceremony, became something else entirely. It became a teacher, a judge, a supervisor, a measure of how still you could stay. If you've ever sat in a school desk, you know the feeling. You weren't just expected to sit, you were expected to perform the act of sitting, perfectly, predictably, silently, no rocking, no shifting, no leaning too far forward or backward, no slouching, especially no slouching, because slouching meant defiance, or apathy, or that your spine was doing what spines do when trapped in bad angles. The classroom chair wasn't designed to support, it was designed to contain. Rows of students, aligned like soldiers, facing one direction, toward one speaker. It was never a circle, never a shape of inclusion or discussion. It was a line, a path, a system. The chair trained us before we even knew we were being trained. And when you left the classroom, you didn't leave the posture behind. You walked into waiting rooms where all the chairs faced a receptionist. You walked into offices where chairs surrounded the boss but never matched his. His had arms, leather, height. Yours didn't. You learned, even without thinking, to sit lower than those with more authority. You learned that your worth was reflected in the amount of cushioning between you and the floor. The higher your status, the softer your chair, and sometimes the taller your chair. In courtrooms, the judge sits high. So do politicians. So do religious leaders. The throne was never about comfort. It was about elevation, a literal reminder that their words come from above, that you must look up to speak and they must look down to answer. This isn't a coincidence. Chairs have always been about power. Ancient rulers sat while others stood. Kings received guests while seated, never rising unless it was strategic. Even today, CEOs conduct interviews from behind desks, separated by barriers and angles that distort equality. The chair is not just a seat, it is a signal, a stage, a subtle cue that says this person has earned the right to rest while you have not. And in that framework, stillness becomes virtue. Moving too much is seen as disrespect. A wandering eye, a bouncing knee, a shifting weight, it all suggests disobedience, lack of focus. And so we compress ourselves. We hold still even when it hurts. We sit properly, not because it helps, but because it's what's expected. And when we fail to maintain that stillness, we feel guilt. Not because we've done something wrong, but because the chair taught us to believe we had. At work, the chair defines rank. The executive chair leans, it swivels, it supports. The entry-level chair is stiff, fixed, replaceable. In the boardroom, no two chairs are truly the same. Some creak, some recline, some barely hold together. They tell you who matters without saying a word, and if you've ever sat in a cheap folding chair at a graduation while the faculty sat on padded velvet, you felt the difference. Not just in your back, but in your status. Even in your own home, chairs hold judgment. The dining chair says, eat here, not there. The office chair says, this is where work happens, not rest. The guest chair says, you're welcome, but only briefly. And sometimes the lack of a chair says even more. You don't belong. You're not expected. There is no place for you here. And for those who don't get to sit, waiters, nurses, security guards, cleaners, what does that say? That rest is a reward, not a right. That to pause is to fail. That support is conditional. Ironically, the people who most need the chair are often the ones denied it. And the people who most use the chair are the ones being damaged by it. Still, we return to chairs that pinch, that sag, that tilt just slightly too far back when we're tired. We blame ourselves for not sitting correctly instead of blaming the thing we're sitting on. We accept the discomfort because we assume it's our posture, not the furniture that framed it. And perhaps most disturbingly, we pass this down. We tell children to sit still, to pay attention, to stop fidgeting. We give them tiny chairs and ask them to mimic adult behavior. We correct their bodies before they know what their bodies are for. We tell them through repetition that chairs are good, that discomfort is normal, that pain is weakness, that stillness is success, and we grow up believing it. The chair becomes part of the system, quiet, polite, neutral looking, but never neutral. It rewards obedience and punishes motion. It teaches us how to fold ourselves smaller, how to take up less space, how to wait. And when we try to stand again, stand for our health, our energy, our clarity, it's hard. Not because we can't, but because we've forgotten how, because the chair taught us not to. Not all chairs are meant to be sat in. Some are meant to intimidate, others to impress, some to haunt. There are chairs you pass by in old mansions or city museums sitting in the corner, covered in velvet ropes, elevated on a tiny platform, lit from below as if they were relics of a forgotten god. No one dares to touch them, no one even tries, not because they're fragile, but because they're sacred, symbolic, untouchable. The chair isn't an object anymore, it's a position, and often it's the empty chair that holds the most power. The unoccupied throne at the head of the table, the presidential seat left vacant before a meeting begins, the chair behind the pulpit, high and centered, waiting. We're told it's reserved. For whom? For someone important, someone worthy, someone we are not. The space itself speaks louder than the wood, the fabric, the design. It says, "You don't belong here." And somehow we understand that, instinctively, without needing to be told. Because humans have been building symbolic chairs longer than they've been building homes. In ancient cultures, the ground was standard. Mats, cushions, floors. Most people didn't have chairs. They knelt, crossed their legs, leaned on one another. Chairs were rare, expensive, elevated, literally and figuratively. And so when someone had a chair, it wasn't just about furniture, it was about status. You rose above others, not just physically, but socially, spiritually, culturally. In China, during the Tang Dynasty, chairs slowly began replacing floor mats, but they were still reserved for the elite. Visitors to the imperial court had to bow before taking their place, if they were allowed to sit at all. The chair became a measure of your worth. In medieval Europe, the idea of the throne went beyond monarchy. Thrones were crafted for bishops, judges, abbots, anyone with authority. Often they were intentionally uncomfortable, tall backs, narrow arms, hard surfaces, because comfort wasn't the point. Permanence was. Discipline. A display of divine or legal endurance. The chair said, "I rule, even when it hurts." And then there are chairs of cruelty. You've seen the images in documentaries. Metal restraints, wooden frames stained dark by time, and perhaps other things. Some were called interrogation chairs. Others were used in asylums not to heal, but to pacify, to neutralize, to reduce a person to stillness by force. Some chairs were electrified, others had spikes. Some were built just awkward enough to cause joint pain after a few minutes. And they were always justified, for order, for safety, for compliance. But the truth is, these weren't chairs. They were weapons, wearing the disguise of furniture. And not all have disappeared. In modern prisons, some restraint chairs are still used, designed to immobilize, not to support. The logic remains, stillness equals obedience, but at what cost? Even in everyday life, the same message echoes, just more quietly. Think of the boardroom, where one chair is higher, wider, maybe placed slightly above the rest, or at the end of the table with a better view. It's not random, it's structure. Someone leads, others follow, and the chair tells you which is which before anyone speaks. In religious ceremonies, a single chair may face the congregation while the rest face forward. In academic rituals, the chair of a department isn't just a title, it's a throne of responsibility. We still say someone takes the chair when assuming leadership. We still talk about chairing a meeting even when no actual chair is involved. The word itself became shorthand for authority. That's not an accident. It's history, compressed, preserved, passed on in rituals too subtle to question. And then there are the chairs no one's allowed to sit in, not ever. The Pope's throne during certain liturgies, the Queen's ceremonial seat in Parliament, the Founder's chair in a memorialized office, preserved behind glass. These aren't just off-limits because of tradition, they're off-limits because they represent something no living person can fully occupy. They represent memory, reverence, myth, and we protect those myths by never sitting in them. Ironically, some of the most powerful chairs are also the most fragile, not physically, but symbolically. If the wrong person sits in them, the illusion breaks, the story cracks, the room changes. Suddenly it's not a throne, it's just an old piece of wood with fabric. That's the strange magic of chairs. They can carry meaning, or lose it in an instant. So we tread carefully, we preserve their distance, we reinforce their stories, not with force, but with belief. Because it's not the object that holds the power, it's our willingness to see it as more than it is. A chair is never just a chair, it's a statement, a position, a warning, and sometimes a ghost. Because even when empty, it holds presence, a reminder of who once sat there, or who might return, or who never will.
So after centuries of awkward sitting, painful backs, and silent suffering, we arrive at the modern age, an era that promised progress, comfort, and solutions to ancient discomforts. And yet somehow the chair remains stubbornly terrible. You walk into a sleek office, the kind with glass walls, minimalist decor, and potted plants that seem more alive than the people. In the center of the room, there it is, the ergonomic chair. Glossy, futuristic, often black, always intimidating. It claims to be adjustable, supportive, revolutionary, but the truth is it just has more knobs. You sit down, twist a lever, shift your weight, adjust the armrest up by 2 centimeters, and still somehow you feel like your spine is folding like a poorly constructed lawn chair. This is the modern illusion, that discomfort can be engineered away with plastic, mesh, and instructions you never read. The chair no longer looks like a chair. It looks like something you'd find in the cockpit of a spaceship. Angular, complex, vaguely threatening, but it doesn't cradle you, it corrals you. It gives you a sense of control while quietly restricting every natural movement your body wants to make. You roll it forward, you tuck it under a desk, you hear it squeak when you shift, but you don't question it. You assume it's your fault, your posture, your habits, your laziness. You buy lumbar pillows, you try standing desks, you Google stretches for lower back pain at 2 a.m., and all the while you never question the one constant, the chair itself. It follows you from office to meeting room, from co-working space to therapist's office, from university lecture halls to podcast studios. It's everywhere, in every room that asks you to sit for long periods and pretend you're fine. And it's not just at work, it's at home too, at your dining table where the chairs were chosen for aesthetics, not anatomy, at your kitchen counter where the bar stools are so high you lose circulation, on your couch where you sink too deep, slouch too soon, and rise with a quiet grunt of regret. You tell yourself it's normal. Everyone's back hurts, everyone shifts in their seat, everyone has that moment at the end of a long day where they stand up and feel like their spine is arguing with gravity, and yet everyone accepts it, like a global agreement we never signed, but silently obey. Discomfort is part of sitting. That's the rule. That's the deal. But what if it didn't have to be? What if we design seats the way we design shoes, based on movement, flexibility, and actual human bodies?
What if we acknowledge that comfort isn't a luxury, it's a need? What if, instead of blaming ourselves for fidgeting, we question why we need to in the first place? The chair, in its current form, is not neutral. It's not passive. It shapes us. Physically, emotionally, even socially. Think about how chairs are arranged, in rows, in circles, in hierarchies. Who sits where? Who gets the comfy seat? Who stands? Who waits? Chairs have always been more than furniture. They're status, control, a silent language of space and permission. Look at a courtroom. Look at a classroom. Look at a boardroom. Every seat means something. The high-backed swivel chair at the head of the table, the folding chairs in the back, the tiny plastic seats in schools that barely support a child, let alone a thought. We learn early that some chairs have power, and some just have splinters. Even in your own home, the chair becomes a territory. That's my seat, someone says. A claim, a boundary, a ritual. You sit there because it feels right, familiar, yours. But does it feel good? Probably not. You've just learned to tolerate it, because what other choice is there? The market is full of promises. Memory foam, mesh support, kneeling chairs, saddle stools, gaming thrones with built-in speakers and neon lights. Each one a new hope. Each one a new compromise. And yet they all have something in common. They weren't made for rest. They were made for productivity. They're not there to support you. They're there to keep you still. And stillness is profitable. You sit longer, you type faster, you produce more, you hurt quietly. And eventually, you stand up to stretch. Not because you're tired of sitting, but because your body is tired of being ignored. And so a cycle forms. You wake up stiff, you sit down to work, you shift all day, you collapse into a couch that offers softness, not support, and you go to bed wondering why your back feels older than you are. Maybe you blame age, or weight, or stress, but rarely do you blame the chair. It's too ordinary, too constant, too invisible. But invisibility is power. The worst villains don't announce themselves. They embed. They become normal, expected, unquestioned. The chair has done exactly that. And so, here we are, surrounded by options, innovations, and endless Amazon reviews, still longing for a way to sit that doesn't make us hurt. Maybe the solution isn't better cushioning or more ergonomic diagrams. Maybe it's a different question entirely. What if we stopped designing chairs to look modern and started designing them to feel humane? What if we listened to our bodies more than marketing? What if we accepted that fidgeting is not a failure, but a signal, a whisper from your spine, a nudge from your hips, a reminder from your knees? That you are not meant to sit like a statue. You are not built for stillness. You are made to move. Even now, as you listen to this, your body adjusts, subtly, instinctively, a shift in weight, a tilt in the head, a small roll of the ankle. You are always seeking balance, and the chair, for all its promises, is rarely offering it. But here's the good news. There is no perfect chair, which means there's no perfect way to sit, which means you can stop searching, you can stop blaming yourself, you can let go, you can lean back, you can breathe. Because right now, in this quiet moment, in the stillness of night, the only thing your body truly needs is rest. And no chair can give you that. Only sleep can. So let's take one last breath. Let the weight of your day fall. Let the tension in your shoulders dissolve. Let your spine soften. Let your thoughts slow. And drift, not in search of posture or productivity or perfection, but peace. There's something almost sacred about repetition. Not exciting, not glamorous, just dependable. The way a clock ticks, not because it's happy, but because it must. The same way you placed your cup on the same table every morning, in the same spot, at the same angle, without thinking. The way your shoes find their position under the bed, the same side, every night. The way your fingers trace the grooves of the chair's armrest while your mind is miles away. That's what routine does. It anchors you, not to excitement, but to familiarity, to quiet, to the kind of silence that doesn't ask for applause. The chair, by now, has stopped trying to impress you. The novelty is gone. The squeak in the backrest is familiar now, almost friendly. You stopped noticing the worn spot on the cushion 3 weeks ago. Your body has molded into its shape, or maybe it's the other way around. That's the power of long exposure. It doesn't shout, it whispers until you forget what silence sounded like. This part of the story is not dramatic, it's not tragic, it's just ordinary. The kind of ordinary that wraps around you like a wool blanket that's a little too warm, but not enough to remove. You don't remember when you started accepting the discomfort. Maybe it was after the 5th meeting in a row. Maybe it was the day the cushion lost its firmness. Maybe it was never a decision. Maybe it was erosion of awareness, of concern, of hope. This is the era of the good enough chair. The office supply version, neutral gray, plastic wheels, adjustable but never quite right, sold not for its brilliance but for its bulk discount. The kind of chair that populates government buildings, waiting rooms, and back offices. They all look the same because no one really wants to look at them. They exist to be forgotten. You might think the chair was designed to support you, but its true genius lies in how well it disappears. Into the background, into your posture, into your habits. It becomes a part of the scenery, a prop in the theater of your daily life, never noticed, always needed. You sit in it to think, to type, to scroll, to eat, to wait, until the act of sitting becomes so automatic you forget it has consequences. But there are consequences. Subtle ones. Lingering ones. A shift in your lower back. A stiffness in the neck. A tension between your shoulder blades that only shows up when you lie down to sleep. You stretch, you rotate, you adjust. You think it's your fault, that you slept wrong, that you moved weird, that you're just getting older. But deep down, your body knows. It remembers. Every hour, every slouch, every forced pose it had to endure. Chairs don't need to hurt you immediately, they just need time. Time to curve your spine, time to shorten your hip flexors, time to compress your vertebrae one by one like pages in a book being slowly closed. And they do it silently. That's the most impressive part. No alarms, no warnings, just one day, a tightness you can't stretch away, a soreness you blame on stress, a visit to the chiropractor you think is a one-time thing, and still, you sit. Because it's what we do. Because the alternative, standing, moving, lying down, feels wrong during productive hours. Because society equates uprightness with discipline. Because our workspaces were designed around static bodies, not dynamic ones. Because comfort, real comfort, is often mistaken for laziness. You don't notice when your legs go numb after too long in the same position. You don't notice when your core muscles quietly switch off. You don't notice when you start leaning on the desk, not for convenience, but for support. And when you finally stand, the blood rushes back like a forgotten debt. The knees protest, the spine realigns, and for a brief moment your body remembers what it feels like to be alive. But the chair waits. It always does. Not like a villain, but like an old acquaintance who overstayed their welcome. You don't hate it, you've just grown tired of pretending it helps. But still, you say nothing. You don't replace it, you don't modify it, you just endure. Because that's easier than changing, because the weight of routine is heavier than the weight of discomfort. In this part of the story, there are no new inventions. No revolutionary designs, no ergonomic miracles, just a slow, silent truce between body and object. A resignation. A quiet handshake with mediocrity. The the kind of compromise that becomes permanent if left unchecked. There's a strange poetry in that, in the way we tolerate discomfort for the sake of continuity, in the way we choose sameness over relief, in the way we normalize the pain that accumulates day by day until it becomes identity. But chairs were never meant to define us. They were meant to serve us, and somewhere along the line, that relationship inverted. Now, we serve them. We rearrange our bodies to fit their frames. We sacrifice movement for stillness. We trade mobility for consistency. And we convince ourselves it's fine, that it's temporary, that we'll stand up soon. After one more email, after one more call, after one more episode. But we don't. Because once the chair claims its space in your routine, it doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't demand devotion. It just waits, silently, patiently, like a background process in your mind, always running, always present, until the day you realize you don't remember what it felt like to sit well. This is not a call to action. There's no rallying cry, no solution waiting at the end. Just a mirror, held up to a habit so common we stopped questioning it. But maybe, just maybe, tonight, through the haze of soft narration and ambient stillness, you'll start to feel it again. The awareness, the memory of how your body used to move, the sense that stillness isn't the goal, that comfort is not submission, that maybe, just maybe, you deserve more than numb thighs and a sore back. So stay still, if you want. Keep sitting, but do so with your eyes half closed and your mind half dreaming. Let the details of this story dissolve. Let the history blur. Let the facts melt into the background hum of forgetfulness. Because sleep is not a rebellion against the chair. It's a temporary escape. A short, gentle moment where the chair loses its power. And you, even without standing, are finally free. Your chair is not just an object. It's a mirror, quiet, ordinary, and often ignored. But still a mirror. It doesn't reflect your face, it reflects your decisions, your patterns, your habits. Not in a flashy, dramatic way, but in subtle hints. The way the cushion is worn more on one side than the other. The way the legs creak when you shift your weight slightly. The indentation of your body that says, "This is where I've settled." Not always where you wanted to be, but where life placed you. Or where you learned to stay. Think about the first chair you ever sat in. You didn't choose it. It was chosen for you. A high chair, a booster seat, a classroom desk. You didn't get a say in the material, the height, the way it supported your back, or didn't. You were told to sit, to stay still, to pay attention. So you did. Because the chair wasn't just a seat. It was a tool of instruction, of conformity, of behavior. And so, from your earliest memories, the chair became a part of the system that told you how to exist. You were never asked if it was comfortable. That didn't matter. What mattered was that you fit into the structure, that your body conformed, that your restlessness was quieted, that your posture matched expectations. And over time, you learned to ignore discomfort. You learned to endure it. You learned that sitting still was a sign of discipline, that squirming was weakness, that pain was a fair trade for obedience. Now fast forward, years pass, the chairs change, but the message doesn't. School chairs become office chairs, kitchen stools become conference seating. Even the most luxurious seats, cushioned, ergonomic, adjustable, carry the same quiet command: sit, stay, work, perform. You tell yourself you've upgraded, that the leather means comfort, that the lumbar support is science, that the price tag justifies the hours you'll spend in stillness. But does it really? Or is it just a more polished prison? Because when the room is silent, when the deadlines fade, when no one's watching, you still shift, you still ache, you still find yourself longing to move, to breathe, to stand, and yet you stay. Why? Because movement feels like rebellion, because comfort feels like indulgence, because productivity has become a posture. And so we ignore the numbness in our legs, the stiffness in our backs, the quiet fatigue in our minds. We blame our age, our shoes, our sleep. We blame everything but the chair. And the chair never defends itself. It doesn't speak, it simply waits. It knows you'll return, because you always do. There's a strange psychology in this routine, a pattern so ingrained that we no longer see it. We enter rooms and immediately seek a seat, not out of need, but out of habit. We sit during meals, during conversations, during tasks that could easily be done standing or walking. We sit to think, we sit to relax, we sit to escape, and then we wonder why our bodies feel trapped. What if the chair is part of the trap? What if the very object we associate with rest has become a source of chronic fatigue? What if we've confused stillness with peace? What if we've mistaken rigidity for order? There's history behind this, deep history. Chairs weren't always for everyone. In many cultures, chairs were reserved for the powerful, the wealthy, the divine. To sit above others was to claim authority. Thrones were symbols of command. Elevated seats meant judgment, control, presence. Everyone else stood, sat on the floor, squatted, moved, and perhaps lived longer because of it. It wasn't until much later that chairs became widespread. Industrialization brought standardization. Offices required uniformity. Schools needed structure. Mass production made chairs affordable. And with that, the world began to sit. More than ever, more than necessary, more than healthy, and no one questioned it. Now, in the 21st century, we are surrounded by chairs. More chairs than people in most places. Cafes, waiting rooms, airports, buses, homes, all designed with one thing in mind: seated humans. But are seated humans what we're meant to be? Or have we molded ourselves to fit furniture that never considered our biology? Look at your own body. It is a machine of movement. Muscles and joints and tendons designed for motion, not inertia. The spine curves naturally, dynamically. The hips rotate, the knees bend, the ankles adjust. Nothing about you was built to be folded into 90-degree angles for hours at a time. And yet, we do exactly that, daily, willingly. Even worse, we celebrate it. We call it hard work, dedication, focus. We build our routines around chairs. We eat, study, scroll, relax, all in the same position. And when the discomfort arrives, we look for better chairs, not better habits. We blame the seat, not the system. And the chair watches, silently. It doesn't scold, it doesn't warn, it simply supports until it doesn't, until the back pain becomes chronic, until the circulation slows, until the body forgets how to stand tall without assistance, and by then it feels too late. The habit is too strong, the furniture has become part of your identity, but here's the truth. It's not too late. It never is. The chair may have shaped your days, but it doesn't own your nights, especially not tonight. Tonight, you're here, not at a desk, not in a meeting, not expected to produce, respond, or perform. You are allowed, in this quiet space, to question everything, even something as ordinary as a chair. You can feel the weight of your body and listen, not to a boss or a teacher or a screen, but to yourself. You can shift, stretch, recline. You can find comfort without permission, stillness without shame, rest without reason. And maybe, as you drift into sleep, you'll remember that the chair was never the enemy. It was just a reflection, a signal, a placeholder. And you're the one with the power to choose where and how and why you sit. So let yourself go. Let the breath deepen. Let the shoulders fall. Let gravity take its gentle grip and pull you into softness. The chair is still here, but tonight it's not in charge. You are. You've probably never thought much about the backs of chairs. Not really. Most people don't. They sit down, they lean back, they accept whatever shape the chair provides without question, without resistance, because that's what chairs are for, right? They're just there. Background furniture, part of the scenery of a day. But the truth is, the back of a chair has shaped more of your life than you realize, because what supports you, quietly, invisibly, has the most influence. It's never loud, never dramatic, it just holds you. Or it doesn't. Think of every time you sat down to work, to eat, to rest. Think of how your back met the chair. Did it greet you with kindness, with relief, or did it press against your spine like a stubborn wall, unyielding and blind to your shape? The answer doesn't matter, because by the time you noticed, the damage was already done. The back of the chair is where the negotiation between comfort and conformity happens. It's the silent battlefield where your muscles tense against design flaws made by people who never met you. A shallow curve, a hard edge, a padded lie. And we accept it, not because we want to, but because we've been trained to believe there's no other option. But it wasn't always like this. In ancient Egypt, chairs were for gods and kings. Their backs were tall, slanted, commanding. They weren't designed for comfort, they were declarations of status. The taller the back, the more powerful the occupant. And comfort, that was irrelevant. A straight back meant you were strong, or obedient, or both. Fast forward to medieval Europe. The back of a peasant's stool? Non-existent. Because why waste wood on rest? You were meant to work, not lean. Rest was not a right, it was a reward. And rewards came rarely, so most people sat forward, hunched, bodies adapting to absence, spines folding into themselves, quiet surrender to necessity. But in the halls of lords and monarchs, chairs became thrones. Their backs were carved, gilded, draped in velvet, still stiff, still unforgiving, but impressive. The goal wasn't comfort, it was intimidation. Height, prestige, power measured in inches above eye level. The chair wasn't furniture, it was a costume. Even in the Renaissance, with all its focus on humanism and anatomy, chairbacks remained decorative first, functional second. Artists studied the body in motion, in repose, and ecstasy, but furniture makers? They still built chairs like altars, unmoving, impractical, holy in a way that mocked the human form. The Industrial Revolution changed that, or pretended to. Mass production brought chairs to the masses. Factories could produce thousands, even millions of identical backs. The problem? Bodies aren't identical. So suddenly every worker, every student, every diner, every dreamer was leaning into a lie. A standard curve for a non-standard spine. At first we didn't complain. We were just glad to sit, to rest, to not stand for 12 hours. But over time, that rest became routine, routine became expectation, and expectation became pain. Now we live in a world full of chairbacks pretending to care. They whisper ergonomics, they promise relief, but most of them still follow templates from decades ago. Templates designed for a fictional user with average height, average posture, average needs. And if you don't fit, you're told to adapt, sit straighter, move more, blame your body, not the chair. But what if the chair was wrong? What if it's always been wrong? What if the reason your shoulders tighten isn't because you're stressed, but because the chair invites tension like a bad habit? What if your lower back pain isn't from age or weakness or laziness, but from a lifetime of leaning into false support? Because that's what most chairbacks are, false support. They offer the suggestion of care, the illusion of relief, a slope here, a cushion there, but it's not enough. It's never been enough. And still we sit. We sit in schools, in offices, in cars, in planes, on benches, in waiting rooms, at dinner tables, in therapist offices, at funerals, on porches. We sit when we're tired, when we're bored, when we're told to, when we don't know what else to do. And behind us, always, the chair. Even now, as you listen, your back is probably pressed against something. Maybe soft, maybe hard, maybe not even touching it at all. But it's there, silent, watching, shaping. So let's think about the backs we've trusted. The ones that gave, the ones that held, the ones that cracked, the ones that collapsed. Chairs in childhood homes, chairs in classrooms, chairs in churches. Each one a small memory, a small influence, a small story in the spine. You may not remember the exact shape or the exact moment, but your body does. It remembers how long you sat, how still you had to be, how wrong it felt to shift, to stretch, to challenge the posture assigned to you by a rectangle of plastic and 4 screws. And if you close your eyes, you might feel it now, that quiet resistance, that old ache, that familiar nudge to lean or curl or escape. But tonight, you don't have to. You don't have to adapt or perform or behave. You can just listen. Let your back find its own shape. Let gravity do the rest. Let the chair fade away. Because the back of a chair is only powerful if you trust it. And right now, you don't have to. You're not at work. You're not at school. You're not waiting for anything. You're here. And here, the chair is just a suggestion. So lean however you want, or don't lean at all. Breathe deeper. Let your shoulders fall. Unclench your spine, let it curve like it wants to. Let your back forget the years of correction and coercion, because tonight it's not about support or structure or strength. It's about surrender and forgetting and rest. Let the back of the chair hold you if it can, and if it can't, just float. You're still sitting. Maybe not physically. Maybe you've shifted. Maybe you've sunk a little deeper into your bed, letting the softness catch you. But in some quiet corner of your mind, you're still there, in that chair. The one that carried you through this whole journey. A journey through wood, through history, through the worn down grooves of time. You didn't expect to feel anything about a chair. No one does. We take them for granted. They're just there, waiting, holding, failing us quietly, supporting us imperfectly, and yet somehow, after all this, it doesn't feel like just an object anymore. It feels like a witness, a companion, a storyteller. This whole time, you thought the chair was still, inanimate. But the truth is, it has been more honest than we ever gave it credit for. It never promised comfort. It never claimed to understand the human body. It just offered itself, stiff and steady, and let us pretend it was enough. And we believed it, because we had to. The chair isn't the villain. It's not malicious. It's simply a shape we kept accepting, a habit we stopped questioning, a frame we kept fitting ourselves into even when it didn't fit us anymore. It is the shape of tradition, the shadow of conformity, and the echo of every room that demanded stillness. Now, you know its secret, and in knowing, something shifts. Not just in your spine or your shoulders, but in your awareness. You start to see it differently. You see the way it leans, the way it presses, the way it demands stillness while offering no kindness. You see the history buried in its joints, the generations of fatigue etched into its design. You remember the chairs of your childhood, The little ones, plastic and hollow, where legs dangled and backs slouched. The school chairs, metal frames, hard seats, unforgiving angles, that taught you discipline before they ever taught you curiosity. The waiting room chairs lined up in rows like silent judges, asking you to wait your turn in discomfort. The office chair, sold as ergonomic, wrapped in mesh and promises, but leaving you aching all the same. And now, maybe, the one you're in now. The one trying to hold you while your mind drifts. Each one tried, in its own way, to be enough, to help, to hold. But the chair was never built for tenderness. It was built for structure. And now, we are tired of structure. We crave softness. Not just in pillows or in blankets, but in ideas, in stories, in histories that don't demand memorization, in words that don't ask us to remember, only to feel. That's what this was. Not a lesson, not a lecture, but a long exhale. You weren't meant to retain these facts. You weren't meant to recall the names of artisans or the dates of patents. This wasn't about mastery. It was about surrender. A surrender to rhythm, to calm, to a voice that asked nothing of you except to listen, or not, to stay awake, or not, to remember, or forget. And as you drift now, because maybe you are, know this. You are not failing to stay alert. You are succeeding in letting go. That is the point. That is the purpose. To release. To allow the edges of awareness to blur into comfort, into safety, into sleep. If the story ends here, let it end gently. Let it fold over you like a blanket you didn't realize you needed. Let it whisper not conclusions, but invitations to rest, to ease, to forgive your body for being tired, for aching, for carrying so much, for so long. Let the chair become a symbol, not of rigidity, but of reflection, not of discomfort, but of history, because now it is part of your story too. And stories, real stories, never really end. They echo, they evolve, they become quieter and quieter until they fade into dreams. So here, in this final moment, let the silence stretch. Let the last words linger. Let your breath carry them away, like dust caught in light. And if you're still listening, if your eyes are still fluttering, if your mind is still wandering through old wooden halls and velvet cushions and squeaky swivels, then you are exactly where you should be. Still, here. Stillness is not failure. Stillness is the final reward. You've walked through centuries tonight. You've sat in palaces and porches. You've felt the weight of design on your spine. You've heard the creak of history under your skin. And now you deserve rest. Let your arms go limp. Let your breath become shallow. Let your thoughts become soft, like cloth on old wood. You are no longer sitting. You are floating, weightless in the quiet. Uprightness was a hask. This is freedom. So sleep now, if you haven't already. Sleep without apology. Sleep as protest against the stiffness of days. Sleep as permission to be unmade and remade again. Sleep not because you're done listening, but because you've heard enough.
And if you wake tomorrow and remember none of this, that's okay. This story wasn't built for memory. It was built for release. And now it releases you. Good night. And goodbye. To the chair, to the story, to the stillness that held you until sleep arrived.